So I'm going to be carrying on this fascinating series that we've been following, looking at enlightenment, a central concept in Buddhism. So first of all, I think I would like to just start off by recapping where Samudra Ghosha took us last week. So last week we had the image of the Buddha 2,500 years ago sitting under the Bodhi tree on the verge of his enlightenment and being assailed by the onslaught of Mara, a very evocative image. The onslaught of Mara, as Samudra Ghosha mentioned last week, could be considered as external forces trying to prevent the Buddha reaching enlightenment. It could equally be thought of as internal forces that get in the way of us reaching enlightenment ourselves. It's a kind of a metaphor. It's quite a rich image. But at the moment of the assaults of Mara, we have the Buddha reaching down from the depths of his meditation and touching the earth, touching nature, touching the earth that we all live on, and calling upon the earth goddess to witness his right to reach enlightenment. Again, another very evocative image. But something in that's always kind of struck me as beautiful, but somewhat odd. Why was it the earth goddess? Normally at these kind of hugely significant moments in history and in myth and all of these sorts of things, it's much more of a sort of a celestial power that gets called upon, something that comes from without, something that is not of us. That is what tends to be called upon. But that's not who came that's not who the Buddha called upon. The Buddha called upon the earth goddess, the goddess of all things natural, the earth that we share 2,500 years later. And I think I'd like to kind of explain why I think that makes sense. So we'll start off by just, in a sense, just looking at what the Buddha is actually doing in gaining enlightenment. So there's a concept in Buddhism which we're not going to be exploring here, maybe another day, the concept of fetters, the concept of things that hold us back from enlightenment. And part of the path towards enlightenment is about breaking these fetters. So these fetters are generally views. There are views that we hold very dearly and which hold us back from enlightenment. And as we gain and as we progress spiritually, we can slowly weaken and then finally break these fetters. So traditionally there are 10, there's various kind of combinations in different traditions, but quite commonly there'll be 10. After you've broken so many, you may become a stream entrant, you may become a once returner. All of these sorts of stages that we pass through on the road towards enlightenment. But the Buddha made it all the way. And what the Buddha, in a sense, did in this breaking of all these fetters, in the defeat of Mara, and in reaching enlightenment, was to align himself entirely with right view. So he went on to teach right view as one of the stages of the Noble Eightfold Path, the fourth noble truth, the path to the cessation of suffering. And a full alignment with the understanding of right view, or praticit samatpada, the law of conditionality, the fact that all things arise in dependence upon conditions. In a way, that is what the Buddha fully understood, and that is what we could see enlightenment as being a manifestation of. It's a full and total alignment with the reality of the view that all things arise in dependence upon conditions. So Artist Today a few weeks ago gave us a very lovely formulation of the law of conditionality, which I can never remember. So I always stick with the simplified form that all things arise in dependence upon condition. And in a way, we could say that the Buddha broke the fetters, he broke through the wrong views, he aligns himself entirely with the right view, the view of Praticitsamutpada, the view of conditionality. But in a way, it's not a view. There's something, it's not a view that can be agreed or disagreed with. It's simply a statement of fact. It is reality. It is nature. It is natural. It's how things really are. But we fail to see that the vast majority of time. We fail to see how things really are. So as leading a fulfilling Dharma life, as progressing towards enlightenment, as progressing in our spiritual lives, all depends on aligning ourselves with the view that all things arise in dependence upon conditions. And this, although it sounds quite simple and quite straightforward, it's not a sort of sterile or simplistic view. It's not a kind of slice of bread plus toaster equals breakfast. It's much, much, much more vast and much, much, much more complicated than that. Whilst that is true, we would have to think about the conditions that gave rise to the bread and gave rise to the toaster, but we can think about it in simplistic terms. But actually, to really come to grips with it, we have to get under the skin and see the world that we live in within, from that, as it were, perspective. So it's very, very complicated in a way, very vast. And to help us, as Artist Today outlined a few weeks ago, there are the formulations, as it were, of conditioned relationships known as the 5 niyamas. So as I say, these are 5 kind of varieties of conditioned relationships, which are canonical. The Buddha did allude to these at various points in his teaching. They have been refined over the years by various scholars, and this evening I've based my talk very much on the kind of refinement put forward by our teacher and founder of this movement, Urkin Sangharakshita. So the 5 niyamas are just to explain quite quickly, and then to explain how that relates to the topic of the presentation. It starts with utu, as it's known. We don't really need to bother with these names. But the utu niyama really is the collection of what we consider of physics and chemistry. So it's the conditions of mountains, rivers, streams, weather patterns, planets, all things inorganic in a way. So the laws, there are laws within the utu niyama. So the laws present within the utu niyama would be things like the law of thermodynamics, the law of gravity, electricity. It's not exactly a law, but electricity would be explained or would exist within that. And whilst we can see that planets orbit each other, laws of gravity exist, we tend in a way to just sort of take all that, as it were, for granted. But actually, these laws are products of conditions. We cannot deny that the laws exist, even if they are in their own way conditioned. But they are fully in accordance with the law of conditionality. Looking at things slightly more complicated, moving into the more kind of organic realm, we have the Bija Niyama, where we have things like the laws of biology and botany would come into play. So plants, simple animals, we would have the processes of photosynthesis, processes of reproduction, of genetics, all of these sorts of things that we know occur and take place. We're here as a result of it. We're very dependent upon them. But these would all fall within the Bija Niyama, and they have their own processes and laws that we're very familiar with, we rely very much upon, and to a degree we take for granted. Moving on to a slightly more complicated niyama, we have the Mano Niyama. Within the Mano Niyama, we would have the studies of, for example, zoology, behavioural sciences. So in the Mano Niyama, we would have phenomena like instinct. We all have instincts, all animals have instincts. These we take for granted, and these would exist within the niyama known as Mano. So there would be perception, there would be survival strategies, there would be complex patterns of migration of wildebeest, birds, tens of thousands of miles, flying between feeding grounds or breeding grounds. All of these kind of phenomena are part of the natural world in which we live. We understand, well, don't fully understand, we're aware of, and they would all fall within the Mano Niyama. And all of these niyamas, complex as they are based on phenomena and laws that we're quite comfortable with. So then we move up to the niyama where we are. So we move into the Kama Niyama. The Kama Niyama would encompass beings like ourselves that have consciousness. Consciousness probably arose in the Mano Niyama. So in the Kama Niyama, we have beings that are conscious, and more than conscious, self-reflectively so. So we have beings that are aware of being aware. So we are self-reflective. And within the Kama Niyama, there is a law which operates, a natural law, and that is the law of ethics. So within the law of ethics, we have to understand or believe that our actions of body, speech, and mind have consequences for our mental states, have consequences for our mind. Act out of generosity, compassion, truthfulness, we will experience contentment, openness, receptivity, and generally be better to be around. If we act out of hate, greed, if we lie, then we would experience narrow, closed, defensive, uncomfortable states of mind. We would generally be unpleasant to be around. So in a very kind of broad brush nutshell, that would encompass the law of ethics, that our behaviour has effects and influences how we feel, how our mental states are. And the challenge in a way of looking at the niyamas is that most of the other processes and laws we kind of take for granted and don't question. The invitation here is to understand and not question that ethics is equally a law. All of the niyamas have laws that kind of underpin them. In the Kama Niyama, we have the law of ethics. And so the challenge is each of us within our own experience to actually understand and believe that that law is in operation. Some of us may be fully convinced that that law is in operation. Some of us maybe a bit more skeptical, just kind of open-minded, exploring. That's all fine. It's all absolutely fine. We have to believe in ourselves that the law of ethics is in operation, and that actually the law of ethics is as natural in the universe, in our experience, as the law of gravity, that none of us really think twice about. Quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge. But actually, if we do accept that, or at least if we do provisionally for the moment, whereas we're just exploring, having an open mind, then ethical behaviour is trying to align our actions with the way things really are. Could even go as far as to say that the universe is ethical. The universe is ethical. So this is quite big stuff that we're exploring this evening. So we've been through 4 of the niyamas, there are 5, and the 5th one, called the Dhamma niyama. In the Dhamma niyama, we have those processes, those conditions by which Buddhas arise, by which enlightenment is achieved. And enlightenment itself is neither random nor is it guaranteed. It is gained through the establishment of a series of conditions, each one arising from the previous condition according to the law of Praticca, according to the law of conditionality, according to the law that this condition will arise on the basis of preceding ones and will cease should those preceding ones cease. So these niyamas, excuse me, categorize all possible patterns of condition. In our world, in our universe, in our minds, they are all encapsulated within these 5 niyamas. From apples falling, from planets orbiting, whether we have brown or blue eyes, whether we're tall, short, whether we're fat or thin, right up to enlightenment, all of these conditions are categorized within the niyamas. And of course, the niyamas themselves, although presented as kind of discrete entities, they're not really discrete and they're not particularly separate. Movement is possible between them. We can see, if we think about the first 3, even the first 4, Utu, Bija, Mano, and Kama. Again, don't need to remember these words. I've got them written down. That's the only way I know. This was essentially traditionally taught evolution in schools. So from a primordial soup after the Big Bang, there was probably some lightning bolt which created some early amino acids, and then these became unicellular organisms that became multicellular organisms, became plants, developed photosynthesis. Somewhere along the line, more complicated organisms arose, ate the plants, and so on and so on and so on, right through traditionally taught evolution. You could say that the traditionally taught evolution through the niyamas indicated a progressive trend. There was a trend of progression from simple inorganic molecules somehow becoming somewhat organic, right up to us here at Sangha Night exploring enlightenment. And this progressive trend, in a way, is twofold. In the early stages, up to the Kama Niyama, there was no conscious effort. There was just opportunities, exploitations of those opportunities. Some of those exploitations worked very well. Some of those exploitations failed. And through processes of opportunities, trial and error, the vast complexity that we see around us arose. However, from here, in the Kama Niyama, where we find ourselves, we have the development, the possibility of conscious development. So we have the possibility of conscious development. But that conscious development is not a given. That conscious development is a choice. It's a choice that we can all make. Many of us here are clearly interested in making that choice, albeit with great conviction, or perhaps more provisionally. It doesn't matter. We're aware of that choice, and we can make it if we decide to. We can make the choice to cultivate more contented states of mind, more subtle states of mind, more sublime states of mind. That is the path we can choose. That is the path to enlightenment. But how do we do that? Well, we do it quite simply. There are various formulations. The simplest and perhaps the easiest and perhaps one of the best is simply the threefold path. So the path of ethics, central role of ethics, the law of ethics, the ethics that we align ourselves with because ethics are natural. The path of meditation that we've just done, and Samudra Ghosha very beautifully outlined how central and important meditation is on this pathway. And the path of wisdom, so combination of meditation and ethics, by itself gives a rise to wisdom, but equally by coming along to talks like this and talks by other teachers and by doing further studies, we develop wisdom. And as we develop this wisdom, we can begin to leave behind the rounds of conditioned existence, the rounds of conditioned existence that would be very beautifully and deeply exemplified in the Tibetan Wheel of Life, which we explored in a Sangha Night series several months ago. Very, very, very deep, fascinating and quite beautiful kind of image of our samsaric world, as it were, our world of constantly falling victim to our habits, constantly falling into the same problems, constantly making the same mistakes. We can choose to leave that behind, and we can choose to leave that and to start to develop in the steps towards enlightenment. We can start to develop some faith, and from faith arises the 12 is known as the 12 nidanas. So we can start to move up the nidana chain towards enlightenment at the top, each step being dependent upon the step preceding. And each step gets ever subtler, and each step is brings ever more sublime states of mind all the way up to enlightenment itself. And within that, we have to have faith. Faith is the first step. We have to have faith that in the establishment of each stage of the path, the conditions are ripe for the next stage to arise. And in a way, what we have to do is to align ourselves with the truth of Paticca Samutpada, the faith on the arising of any particular condition based on a preceding one, aligns us with the truth of Paticca Samutpada itself. Operating in the Dhamma Niyama, just as in all the other preceding niyamas. So to come towards the end, of the talk, I'd just like to, I suppose, explain in a way what can give rise to that faith. There are a lot of questions in this. There are a lot of things to overcome. There's a lot of natural resistances that we need to be working against. And so one of the questions is, we're quite familiar with the Kama Niyama. We may even be, to lower or higher extents, convinced about the law of ethics. But what experience do we have of the Dhamma Niyama? What have we seen of that? How do we know it's there? Well, my initial thoughts on this, when I reflected on that, took me back to a retreat at Padmaloka, which is the men's retreat centre not far from Cambridge, in just outside Norwich. And I was on a retreat there, a meditation retreat, where we were following the Anapanasati meditation. Some of you may have heard of that. It's a formulation of mindfulness, basically. It's a mindfulness meditation. And we were doing that quite intensively over a period of about 10 days. And my mental states, general kind of level of mental states, were becoming more and more refined during those 10 days on that retreat. We were in silence, but there was still an amazing amount of communication went on within the silence with the other retreatants. And there was one afternoon we were having another meditation sit of the Anapanasati, and I was getting quite concentrated. My mind was feeling quite subtle, quite refined, very, very pleasurable. And for a few moments, I don't really know exactly how long, I kind of lost connection with the sense of body, lost connection with the sense of time, really. I was just meditating. I wasn't sort of thinking about meditating. I wasn't watching myself meditating. In a way, I kind of got out of the way, and I was just meditating. A very, very nice state to be in. And for a few moments within that meditation, I lost all sensation of just about everything. I just became love. My entire kind of experience was just love. I couldn't feel the cushion. I didn't know the time. I didn't hear anything. I wasn't even fully aware of the breath that I was watching whilst I was meditating. It was the object of the meditation. I was just love. That's all that was there. Just pure love. It was one of the most sublime moments I've ever experienced. And I remember it quite distinctly. Sadly, I've never been back there. I've been back to Padmaloka. I've never been back to that experience. But in a way, it's given me the faith. It's given me the faith that what the Buddha explains through the Nidana chain, through leaving the conditioned rounds of existence that we tend to spend most of our time in, having faith in the law of conditionality, of paticca samutpada, having faith that the establishment of a set of conditions through meditation or just general life will give rise to the possibility of the arising of the next stage of subtlety or sublimeness. I have faith in that. So I had another couple of examples I was going to share, but sadly we seem to have run out of time. So in a moment I'll invite our Zoom host this evening, Adele, to whiz you all off into your groups. And in those groups, there are a couple of questions for you to explore. By all means, just explore whatever feels alive. But as a bit of an aid, there are 2 questions. So I've just explained an experience where, as it were, I experienced myself at my best. I could never be anything other than at my best when I just felt to be nothing but pure love. So when do you think you were at your best? And following from that, what did that feel like? And of course, following from that, if you get that far, does that motivate you to try and get back there?